and talking Picnic at Hanging Rock from 1975, directed by Peter Weir, spine number 29 in that Criterion Collection. On St. Valentine's Day 1900, at the Appleyard College in Victoria, Australia, 3 students and a teacher up and disappear at Hanging Rock, a rock formation in the Australian wild, all while a group from the school has gone on a picnic. The police investigate, question a couple of boys who saw them. One of the girls who went up with them and hysterically went running down before they disappeared has no idea what happened to them. No one seems to know. Of the 2 boys who saw the girls go up, one of them, Michael, becomes interested in the case and goes up to Hanging Rock himself to look for them. There, he has his own strange hallucinogenic experiences, finding scrapes of lace. One of his other friends comes along, Albert, and they find one of the girls who went missing, named Irma. But of course, we learn she has no memory whatsoever of what happened to her or the other girls. There's another girl from the school named Sarah, who was a former roommate with Miranda, sort of the lead girl of the missing women or girls. And she is just having a horrible time at the school, being an orphan whose funding at the school is tenuous and resulting in the madam of the school singling her out for correction. We get to follow her story of institutional bullying and torture, all leading to one of those Peter Weir plot points of suicide that we can see in Dead Poet Society and the movie Fearless as well. And the movie kind of comes to a close, and there are no answers to be had. This movie really is not at all about plot or story. It's really about atmosphere, more so than any other movie that we've watched, I think, up to this point. So, I mean, it's like one thing to you could read the back of the package of the movie and read it and know what it's kind of about and be like, that sounds really like I know what to expect of it. And I mean, it literally is just that. It's a story about 4 people that just up and disappear one day, and people trying to find out what happened to them, try to go about their days afterwards. That's kind of the thing. So RJ, what did you think of Picnic at Hanging Rock?
Well, Jarrett, I'm going to lay it down for you real thick here for a second.
Okay.
So as I was the Peter Weir expert this week, I did even more research, and I read the essay that accompanied the package. However, also, this nice Criterion set that you had also had a novel by Joan Lindsay, which I think the movie is pretty, or based on like pretty good. Like it's pretty close, I guess.
Yeah, it's pretty true to the spirit of it.
So I didn't read the book, but I did read the first page. And before the first page, there is a really nice like little epitaph here that I thought completely sums up the way I view this movie. So I'm just going to read this for you. I don't know if you read this or not, but I'm going to lay it out for you. Okay, here it is. Whether Picnic at Hanging Rock is fact or fiction, my readers must decide for themselves. As the fateful picnic took place in the year 1900 and all the characters who appear in this book are long since dead, it hardly seems important. And the way I view this movie is that it hardly seems important. Take that, Peter Weir. Ooh.
Right in the bread basket.
So, I didn't really care for this movie. As I watched a bunch of Peter Weir movies this week, I watched this one and I was like, it's all right. It's not as good as he can be. And so the reason I didn't like this movie, though, Jared,
okay,
is not because it's like boring, like I think people would assume is the reason I don't like it. I actually think the story is really cool. Like it's a really interesting thing that happened, and I think the way that he handles it is very cool. Like the idea that there's this object or area that's like a conduit of something, like a portal, something metaphysical. I think that's all really neat. I just don't think Peter Weir does anything interesting with it. I don't know, man. Like, I feel like he just doesn't do anything that stands out. Like it's like the story is cool, the things he shows is cool, but nothing stands out for me, man. Okay. I don't know. Maybe I missed it. As you said, this is like the most atmospheric, moody kind of movie, and maybe I just wasn't in the right mood, baby.
I don't know. Like I mean, I don't think that is necessarily why you don't like the movie. So, okay, I'll go through my positives with the movie, which all kind of come in the first 45 minutes of it.
Right.
So it opens up with this like really great enigmatic Blair Witch Project style cold open statement of intent.
Absolutely.
It tells you exactly what the movie's going to be. Like it's just like this is what's going to happen, and it sets up dread immediately because you're like, oh my god, like something's going to happen, and these girls are going to be just gone and they're never going to be seen again, and like you just don't know, and like it tells you this like, and now and then the movie starts, and you get this like ominous soundtrack over sublime nature, and there's these just beautiful shots of like the Hanging Rock site, and like the beautiful color that you can only get in Australia, and just like this weird space, and like the music just plays the Zamfir score, which I actually like quite a bit. Just plays over it. You get that really great like calligraphic title card of just like picnic over Hanging Rock over the shot. It's like it looks amazing, and it's like like this movie's like going to be wonderful. It's going to be just about like the absurdity of like civilization trying to put itself into like nature, which doesn't give a shit about civilization at all. It's completely indifferent. And then we get sort of we get pulled back from there, and then we get into the scene with just like the girls kind of getting ready for like their day of going on this picnic, but it's probably their day-to-day life of getting prepared. So you get like the mannered floral textures, you get like that properly Victorian repressed vibe, which actually ties into kind of like the Master and Commander sensibility of like kind of like this like that 19th century like man in the general sense trying to like make a statement about the world they're in and be refined, and like what is a proper individual. So like, there's like sort of that thing that I think Peter Weir is kind of throwing back onto, or at least it's something that he gets kind of would be the word I'm looking for. He's fallen back onto it, I guess, in like later on, years later. But anyway, so like I thought like that stuff was really like, it's beautifully shot. It's like soft focus. I think I saw like somebody wrote an essay about it, mentioning like something about like it's almost got like a soft core like vibe to it. Cause it's like all these like young women like tying each other up and like looking longingly at one another in mirrors and applying their makeup and like getting ready for the day. And then there's like I think before they get sent out by the I think I referred to her as a madam, but I guess like the head mistress or whatever it's called. She's like warning them about venomous snakes and poisonous ants, and that like you will be allowed to take off your gloves when you're there. But that's it. Like you have to be wearing these like ridiculous like outfits while you're like out in the mountains, which is like comical. I think for like you or I imagining going out to like the Rocky Mountains, dressed like to the nines with your tuxedo or something like that. Like you just don't. You dress appropriately, but in like this sort of like colonial narrative, which again kind of goes back to like something like in the Franklin expedition or like Master and Commander, you're always wearing your uniform. Like you don't like the idea that you would dress appropriately for an area, that would be like being like lowering yourself. So like those are all things that I really respond strongly to in the beginning of this movie.
Right.
And then like you get the scope of the rock, like of Hanging Rock, and you get this like the one teacher who disappears, Miss McCraw, and like her like laying out like how this is like a late like this new formation, the rock coming out of the ground, and how it's like this is like only like 1 million years old in the grand scheme of things. It doesn't really matter, and like you just get this like sense of like of time and like how civilization playing out against this backdrop of nature. It all is just like meaningless. You get the insects at work, which is like always like a thing in these Peter Weir Australian movies, like in Gallipoli, or like I think about like in Nicholas Roeg's Walkabout, like just insects and bugs just eating things and like crawling all over the place. And then you get the spooky rocks. You get the like when the girls that they go up the rock face, and then they start walking through the between the rocks and the crevices and stuff like that, and it's like really off-putting. And like you're like, oh no, what's going to happen? Like, because you know that they're going to disappear still. You know it's all like moving toward this. And then there's the one shot where like I think it's like right after they've been laying around, and then they start taking off their boots, and like their shoes, and they start walking around barefoot, which is like just like what's going on? Like what are they doing? They're taking off their boots, and then there's like the one shot of them just like walking through a crevice, and they just disappear. And this is just this idea for me of people walking off into nothingness is just like probably my worst fear. Like just this idea that like 1 minute you could be out there somebody with somebody and they're like, yeah, I'll be right back in a second, and they turn around the corner and then they just completely disappear off the face of the planet. That's just like for me is like one of the worst feelings I could imagine. Like a loved one or something like there's
that's good to know. Now I know how to really torment you.
Yeah, how to mess with me.
Yeah, I'll just start plucking people out of your life when you least expect it.
Yeah. No, like this is like kind of like a side thing, but I remember like a few years ago, I was like up late at night at like 2 a.m, and I was on my laptop and I was looking up like websites that had like unexplained disappearances listed on it, and just like reading these stories about it, and it's just like chilling because it's this idea that like a person could be like just there 1 minute and then just completely gone, and no one knows what happened to them, and like your mind starts filling in the gaps, and to me that's just like, I don't know, terrifying.
Baby, you come to me because you know I'm the conspiracy theory expert. I'll talk to you about aliens, motherfucking disappearances. That's my bread and butter, man.
Yeah. So the first 45 minutes of this movie I think are like really extraordinary. I think they're amazing. And then they go back to the school, and then there's something that happens in this movie, and then it kind of gets into like, I guess you'd call the procedural part. And that's when it just like goes on. And it never seems to really get back to any of the mystery. And like, it's not like I want resolution. I don't. I don't care what happened to them. I think the power of the movie is obviously in not knowing. But I think that all the pieces are there to have made just a better movie.
Right?
Yeah, no, I think it's like, I love that first 45 minutes. I think they're amazing. But then there's just something that it just kind of goes awry. And I couldn't, like, it just feels like the story just isn't that interesting from that point forward. And even like there's like the thing where like the police officers questioning the boys, and like, well, and there's like this like idea that like, well, maybe these girls have been like taken and raped and killed or whatever. But I never even get that sense that was ever really seriously pursued, or some like Aborigines came along and killed them. And it's like, no, you never get that sense. It seems like there's no real like theory to it. There's no, I don't know. It doesn't seem really interested in anything.
Right. That's exactly how I feel, man. Like, it's like I was saying, I really like the idea and the story. Like, I think it's super interesting and all that. And like the first 40 minutes is really good. It's just, it completely drops off then. And like, I don't, when I read the essay, they were talking about how a common criticism is that it's an unresolved ending. And I agree with you. Like, I honestly, like, that didn't bother me at all. Like, sometimes I think being vague like that works better for movies. Like, look at Inception, man. And people still talk about that ending. I know you're cringing, but I'm just using that as an example here. My point is that I don't think the unresolved ending is
that's not the problem.
That's not the problem. It's exactly like what I was trying to say, and like what you also said was, this should be really good. It's got all the right elements. Everything's there, but it's just he doesn't pull it together. Like, there's nothing that stands out in this movie for some reason. I don't know if it was too early in Peter Weir's career, or he just, like, there's something with the material that you just couldn't crack or something. It's all there. It's just, it doesn't come together, which is too bad, because I think the story's super cool.
Yeah, no, it's a great story. Like, or the idea for the story is like really good, and like the idea that the it's like kind of like when it was written in the '67, it was kind of presented as like a true story, maybe.
But
and then
not
like,
really.
Yeah, but it's like, it's funny when you read about it. So people refer to it as like a historical drama, which I mean, I guess is just a fancy way of maybe saying period piece. But like this idea that, well, maybe it was based on a true story, which is like funny to think of. Like, it's like, well, no, there'd be documentation if it happened one way or another. We would know. There's no vagueness to it. It's like, no, we would find out if like 4 people just vanished in 1900. There'd be like websites about it, like, or like even in the 70s there'd be like news articles about this, but there isn't. So it's like, so that's neither here nor there, but Yeah, I don't know, but like, and as far as like Peter Weir, actually, I did my little bit of reading because I was kind of curious about him because we will be talking about Peter Weir again, and that'll be with The Last Wave, which I think is which is actually I think like a much better movie.
Is that a nautical adventure as well?
No, it's a contemporary Australian tale of a man. No, you'll like it.
Okay.
I think you'll dig it because, like I said, like as you were talking about earlier in this episode, Peter Weir is very inconsistent.
Yes.
Because like for my experience with him, I mean, there's like I've seen like almost everything of his except for like a handful of things, and there's like movies I just will never watch, like the movie Green Card. I'll never watch Green Card in my life. Dead Poet Society is like one of like those movies I absolutely hate. I think it's.
Oh really?
Yeah.
What are you, a monster?
No, it's garbage. That movie sucks.
Oh, that's too bad, Jared.
No, that movie's really terrible. But Truman Show, amazing. Master and Commander, amazing.
Yeah.
And even like he's like again, hey, bringing back Harrison Ford for a moment. The movie Witness in Mosquito Coast. Not so great.
Well,
he's very much like in the 50-50 club. In his like most recent movie that he made, The Way Back, just fine, like kind of in that Gallipoli
I heard that was
camp for me. Yeah, it's very like just okay.
I think what it is with him is he made 2 all-time bangers with Truman Show and Master and Commander, and then he's got a lot of mediocre stuff, like really in the middle, and then he's got a few things that are at the bottom of the barrel. Like, if I didn't like Year of Living Dangerously, I don't think he would like it either. Yeah. Or those movies that you just talked about that you didn't like, I probably won't like those as well. But Dead Poets I liked. I haven't seen it in like 10 years, but I remember liking it.
Yeah, I just think that movie, like, it's just, I don't know. It sets up this, like, it's been so long since I watched it, but I remember, like, it just sets up this position where, like, you can't disagree with it. Like, it's so comical and, like, someone has to kill themselves to get the point across, and, like, how great Robin Williams is. It's so cheap. Like, it's just, it's the screenplay more than anything. And it's got old Filthy Seymour Hoffman in there, young Filthy.
Oh, I miss him.
Yeah. So I was reading about Peter Weir because I was kind of curious about the Australian New Wave that came about in the 70s. Because so, I mean, it's actually interesting because Australia being a fellow Commonwealth country, I was kind of interested to see like how much the Australian film industry kind of reflected Canada's, and there are some definite like similarities because I guess like basically
how so?
Okay, so there was no Australian film industry to speak of until like until the government stepped in to essentially create one. Because up until that point, there was a few like silent films that had gotten made, but I mean, like every other part of the world, it was dominated by America's Hollywood machine, where it was just like everyone was watching American Hollywood movies because they were able to like get the resources together to make movies because it's really expensive to make movies, as you might have heard. And so the only force on earth that I guess that like could really compete with these Hollywood American films would be when governments would actually get their resources together and thus like start creating funding and projects. So in Australia, you got the Commonwealth Filming Unit, which Peter Weir, who had just been working in television at the time, he jumped to and he began making films there. And it's weird because it's reflected in like Canadian history too, and like how both these Commonwealth countries, they kind of want to, as the term my art history professor would call is, cut the apron strings. This idea of like you want to break a link that you have to your home country. So like in the sense of like in Britain, like there's like a predominant view of like how painting should be made, and so Canada's like, well, we have to make a unique. Visually, ideologically interesting, wholly original form of painting. And then so you start having these like governments start getting funding together to give money to the artists in those countries to come up with this like look of what you want, be it film or any sort of form of art. But what winds up happening is the stuff that people respond to is the stuff that kind of just looks like what your original country was making in the first place, or like America. Because I mean,
Right.
what's your frame of reference going to be? It's going to be the things that you've seen all along, and until you make it your own, I don't know. You can take like the visual vocabulary that you've seen in other movies and then apply it to something that is in your own country. So in like these Australian movies, they have the outback, so the movies
Right.
start really taking full advantage of the fact that they're in the outback.
I'll get your out back.
Yeah.
How's that sound? Sorry, no, continue. I'm actually, I do enjoy this. I just,
Yeah.
you can't miss an opportunity like that to drop one of those.
I know, and you can't help yourself.
No. Nope.
So yeah, at this period of time, you got like kind of every director in the world like is influenced by your like the American, British, European art house director types. So like your Bergmans, your Kurosawas, they're like all being watched by directors at the exact same time. As they're getting expanded out. So like Martin Scorsese, Brian De Palma, and Coppola in America. But then you also were in Germany, you get the German New Wave. There's a like Czechoslovakian New Wave. There's a Canadian New Wave, and they're all responding to the wider dispersal of these art house films of like Bergman, Kurosawa, which also, funnily enough, are all films that are going to be being distributed by Janus Films.
Can I just interrupt for a second? Is Canadian New Wave, like, would that be Fubar? Is that like the one that really set it off?
Go a couple years earlier than that.
Okay, let's just say it's Fubar, and then
Okay.
sorry, keep going.
So you have like your, I don't know, your David Cronenberg would obviously be a person that would fit into that. But I mean,
Right.
in Canada, their scheme here was like we always had like the National Film Board, which had its own very specific mode. But then you also
Yep.
got the Canadian tax credit scheme, which was bringing in American investors and getting their productions made in Canada, which also fostered these Canadian directors' careers.
Correct.
So yeah, and this is all happening simultaneously, like in the same like decade, kind of like that post '60s, like student uprising, the exposure of art house films in these countries. Everyone's responding to like Kubrick too, and suddenly they're like, oh, we're all making these unique films, unique to our own country. But they're all kind of like, I mean, Peter, like how can you look at like Picnic and Hanging Rock and not think of like European filmmaking, right? Like it looks,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like very much like it's like other than it's set in Australia, but it's still being made like by a guy who's been watching European art films, which isn't a bad thing, or anything like that. It's just like it's what it is, and I don't know. Yeah. So and it's funny too, is because like all these directors in all these European countries, Australia, Canada, they all wind up inevitably working for Hollywood eventually, because you get Peter Weir working in America. You get Wim Wenders, Milos Forman, Cronenberg. They all wind
Dennis
up.
Villeneuve.
Denny, many
Denny
years later.
Villeneuve.
Yeah, see, he gets sucked in because they give you the opportunities to make movies, and they give you lots of money, and you can start making stuff bigger and brighter, and they win. At the end of the day, it's the hegemonic structure, RJ.
Well, what are you gonna do, man? It's like
You can't
it's
fight
like that,
City Hall.
It's like that Simpsons when Krusty's like licensing out all his stuff, and he's like, emptied a dump truck of money on my lawn. What was I supposed to do?
Yeah.
I get it, man. I would do it too. I'd
yeah.
like Face Off too if the right money came along.
Right. So I guess as far as Picnic and Hanging Rock goes, it belongs to the, I guess what's called the AFC genre, which is the Australian Film Commission. Because basically what they specialized in this period of time was making period pieces about and for Australians, because they wanted to review, like, they wanted to kind of play on their cultural maturity. They wanted to make a statement about being Australian, which like there's the one Canadian art history class I took as a student that like it's like the exact reading this book I could like guess exactly where this was going, because I was like, oh right, and then this happens, and because then you get the critics who are responding to this and saying, yes, this is good Canadian, or this is good Canadian filmmaking or painting and stuff like that. And it's like, oh no, but it's because it looks like something that everyone recognizes already, but they don't know it. They just think, no, this is Canadian because it looks a little bit different. Like the colors are a little bit different, but they're just drawing influences from something else. But it's not a bad thing. It's just kind of something that like to point out, I suppose.
Yeah.
Because like in Canada, we have like this like Canadianness that like gets pushed for like the sort of films that get made. Things like be it like with the CBC and stuff like that. We have like these all the Canadian films that can get made, they have to have a certain amount of Canadian content to it, because that somehow means it's more relevant to Canadians, which is just stupid, and it always has been. This idea of like being like protectionist about like your cultural identity. And like, I mean, the best directors have obviously been the ones that have been able to circumvent that. But I think it's a struggle, like, because like I've looked at these grants before for applying for stuff, and it's like you have to have such and such thing, you have to be appealing to certain things, and I don't know, it's more trouble than it's worth.
Well, you don't got the drive and the determination that I might have.
Yeah.
But no, yeah, I know. I think the way CBC works is that 60 or 70% of all content has to be Canadian.
Whatever that means.
Yeah, it's like, so it has to be like made in Canada by Canadians and like supply or like put out to Canadians. But I think the Australian thing too is like, if your movie has like historical relevance for Australia, like their government pays for it.
Yes.
And then there's the far right, where in China you can only make movies with like historical relevance. So it's a weird world out there, Jarrett.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the trade-off though when you're working with like a government. Because actually, I think one of the, like, he didn't go into it too much, but in one of the documentaries when we were watching RoboCop, Paul Verhoeven made some comment about like how he could make any movie he wanted when the right-wing government was in. And so he was like making like movies like Soldier of Orange and stuff like that, The Fourth Man, and he didn't start running into problems until like the left-wing government got in, and then suddenly his films became objectionable. And it's always like you never know who's going to find your movie like objectionable. Like it could be one day it could be the right-wing government, one day it could be the left-wing government. It all depends on what you're showing and what they view as socially acceptable, and then your movies don't get funded anymore. And then once again you jump ship and you go to America, and then you got to make American movies for Americans and the rest of the world by extension.
Well, what are you supposed to do? Am I right?
Am I right?
Yeah, it's weird, man. Movies are weird.
One thing I'll mention here too was I read a book, or just like the relevant chapters anyway.
You never read a book.
The Films of Peter Weir by Jonathan Rayner, and he mentions how Picnic at Hanging Rock, it really typifies a lot of Peter Weir's kind of visual motifs, which I'll mention here. The amalgamation of the normal and abnormal, collisions between society and individuals, and between societies and external forces, visual hallmarks of bleached pale lighting, soft focused nostalgia haze, and meticulous art direction, and powerful usage of soundtrack and music, reinforcing or undermining the image with conspicuous or incongruous sound.
I don't know half of the things you said, but the sound and music, I have two notes. This is the second movie in a row, consecutive movies to start off with pan flute. So that is fun. And as I was watching all these Peter Weir movies, you know what he does a lot?
What?
He'll have a scene, and then the music will be like some sort of synth pop in the background where it's like boop, 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 boop.
Oh, in Gallipoli, that was really terrible.
Yeah, it's really bad in Gallipoli, whatever that movie is called.
Gallipoli.
Yeah, it's really bad in that one. He does it again in this one, and he does it in The Year of Living Dangerously. And I don't get it. It's like, what? It's like, because in Gallipoli, it's like the guys are running or something, and it's like,
very like, much of its time.
Yeah, you're just like, why is that music in there? That's very bizarre. But I noticed that in this too, and I was like, I guess that's just his thing. Like, he just loves synth pop.
Actually, I watched the short film of his that's on the Criterion as well, Homesdale.
What's that about?
Well, it's actually got a really good write-up that's much better than the actual movie is. Several people gather at the Homesdale hunting lodge, including butcher rock singer Mr. Kevin, war veteran Mr. Vaughn, and an octogenarian Mr. Levy. All are tormented by Homesdale staff and forced to participate in a series of games about death and murder in which the true character of the guests starts to emerge. On paper, to me, that sounds awesome, but boy, is it not interesting at all. Like I didn't even finish it. I just kind of was like, enough's enough. I'm actually just looking over at Peter Weir's filmography right now. The Cars That Ate Paris, that's not bad. But the one, actually, because I watched back in October during our ghouling, was The Plumber.
Creeptober?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I remember. That was one of your top 5 of the month,
Yeah,
was it not?
and I love The Plumber. I thought The Plumber was
Yep.
fantastic. And it's
Yep.
it's actually got a story, and it's actually got things that happen in it. And I don't care, and it doesn't really have much of a resolution, but
Mm-hmm.
it still liked it. So that idea that people single out that the reason they don't like this movie is because it has a lack of resolution is
Nah, that's cool.
I don't buy it either.
I think it's for people who need to find a reason that they don't like it, but
Hmm.
like a reason that they can cling on to that other people also acknowledge. So it's like, well, I don't know why I don't like this. It must be the ending or something like that. That's what other people say.
Yeah.
Maybe
So
you're just an asshole. I don't know.
so when you were reading the essay,
Yes.
on this, what did you think of like this whole angle about like repressed sexuality and adolescent
Oh,
sexuality and
uh,
sexuality? What
I
did you
was gonna
think of
bring that up.
this?
I think that's totally fucking bogus. Not just in the movie, but in fucking practice alone. It's horseshit. So I can speak to this because I have a degree in psychology, and that makes me a world authority on sexuality. No, so yeah, I read that, and I literally I was by myself, and I made this sound like. Like it's like, come on, it's like, well, the volcano eruption, that's like an erection, and
Ah,
venomous snakes, those are like men with their boners.
phalluses.
Yeah, they're like
Yeah.
phallic objects, and women, they're fancy and they do this, and it's like, come on, man. It's like I
Mhm.
think that you're really reaching for those fucking things, and
It's
like the essay, it kept bringing up Freud, and I was
Yeah.
like,
Well,
it's like,
I think
okay,
that, I mean, so to be fair, that
that's
author
fair.
specifically states that they're going to look at it through a Freudian perspective, and I mean, you can find all sorts of stuff through a Freudian perspective.
Well,
But
well, yeah,
what's
exactly.
there's a on the Criterion of it, there's a special feature talking to like I think it's an introduction by like a Australian film critic, just talking about how important this movie is to Australian film history. It's like the greatest Australian film of all
Mm,
time, which is like
no,
nuts. I'm like,
Mad
dude,
Max.
your country created the Road Warrior,
Yeah.
so give George Miller some goddamn credit. Yeah,
Hmm.
it's like I don't know, but again, like this is a funny thing too, is like going with the like that Canadian tax credit thing, which was like all about making exploitation movies.
Right.
Australia also has a history with making its own exploitation films, which is captured very well in the documentary Not Quite Hollywood. It's talking about how
Okay.
there's this strain of like high-minded Australian cinema, which is kind of more along this line of stuff that Criterion would probably release, I guess. But then there's like
Hmm.
the crazy ridiculous movies that in Canada did the exact same thing because it was all about trying to make an actual film industry which relies on people actually going to see your movies and not just being respectful and going to your movies about I don't know doilies and
Hmm.
repressed sexuality allegedly. But yeah, so this guy though he was just going on in this like introduction of the movie about like the sexuality and I'm like, is this another just like old white man perving on teenage girls?
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. That's
And
exactly what it is.
yeah, and so that started the I think the trajectory of these people. Like that's the only way
Yep.
people talk about this movie, and they say that it like it's there, like it's a matter of fact. But I never got that at all from watching this. Like
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I laid it out kind of when I was talking about the stuff I liked about it, and just like, yeah, no, it's about like setting up this idea of like civilization and like how people like kind of distort their bodies and like like they just
Hmm.
like they get I don't know, they're it's all silly and mannered when you compare it to like I don't know the like strange, unknowable, sublime nature of the world. Like it's just like people are silly at the end of the day. And people
Yeah.
talking about like fetishizing and burgeoning sexual curiosity. I don't know.
Yeah. Yes. Very silly, Jared. I think like Freud and stuff like that. Yeah. Like, dude was a fucking sex pervert. Like, that's what he was doing. I get it. His like people find like Freud is synonymous with like psychology, so you make a link to that. But like what you were saying is you can find like overt sexuality and like or like subtextual sexuality in anything. Like we were talking about earlier, Star Wars. It's like, ooh, Darth Vader has a raspy voice. It must be like his oral fixation because he never got over it. I hate it. I hate it, Jarrett. I hate it.
Have you actually? I don't know if you've actually gone through your notes or like said what you've liked about this film.
Okay. Well, I like you very much like the first 40 minutes. And then as I said earlier, I like the idea of like a conduit of things, like an area or object like being some sort of metaphysical thing that like has more to it. Like I like the idea of Hanging Rock being like something like that.
Sure.
Super cool. I liked that their search party had noisemakers because that's something that I never see. Search parties never have noisemakers, and it's like, yeah, of course, why not? Because then they can hear you, but I guess you can't hear them. A dilemma, apparently. I liked a line in this where it said, "People don't just disappear, not without good reason," and I was like, yeah, that's interesting. And then one line I had that I actually underlined was that the police chief called the underpants drawers. So I thought that was of note, apparently, and I wrote it down in my book. So, no, I don't know. Like I was saying, I like the idea of this movie. I like the story a lot.
Yeah.
And there's certain elements that were really nice, but just on the whole, to be honest, I don't think much of this movie. I'm never going to watch this fucking thing again, ever. So,
Yeah.
You take that as it is.
I will.
You.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
I don't know. It's one of those movies too that like I'm trying to remember how I first came across this movie. Like, I think I read the description of it, and like, first of all, at that point, I knew who Peter Weir was because he directed Truman Show, which I thought was just like one of the best things I'd ever seen. And then like I read the description of that movie, and I was like, "Whoa, this sounds incredible! I cannot wait to watch it." And it was always like super expensive and an old bare bones DVD that didn't look very good. And then finally it came. I think I downloaded it actually, and I watched it that time. And I wasn't like, I thought it was like, oh. I remember Chanel was watching it with me at that point, and she was kind of like, "This is kind of going on, isn't it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's not really going anywhere." And then, so watching it this time on Blu-ray, I was like, again, the first 45 minutes, they sucked me right in, and I was like, "Oh yeah, no, this is so much better now that I can finally watch it in high def." And then it just kind of peters out.
Does nothing.
There is the really good scene with like the girl who is found again. And like her like in the red dress, like going into the room to say bye to everybody, and they all attack her because they want to know what happened and stuff like that. Really good scene, but like, I don't know, like how you like the connect tissue there. And I mean, yeah, there's all these scenes in that, like, we've kind of buried the second half of this movie, honestly.
Yeah.
Like there's like the Sarah girl, like, I don't know, you don't really get the build up, the fact that like she's had it so bad that she would kill herself.
He tries to allude to that.
Yeah, but
like he tries, but it doesn't really land.
But again, it's like suicide, and Master and Commander's got suicide in it too.
Yeah, that guy gets a fucking cannonball and just goes down to the bottom
to like alleviate it, and then he breaks the curse. And it's suicide. It's so weird. Now that I think about it, I forgot about that one too.
Maybe he's a big fan of Rogue One.
Yeah.
Or Suicide Squad.
Suicide Squad. Yeah. And then the movie, what did you think of that voiceover narration at the very end that like lays out that Mrs. Appleby was found dead at the base of Hanging Rock? It's
I thought that was funny, but I also had a note where the ADR in this movie was like on fleek, as the kids would say, because there's a scene where there's like the girl who was there, the bigger lady, who like doesn't remember stuff. And by the way, like she didn't get as hard of a time. She was giving that one girl a really hard time, but it's like, man, you were there too, so why are you fucking... Anyways, they like ADR her voice. Like it's very clear. You can tell like her lips aren't moving and then they're moving out of sync, but the audio sounds really good. So I don't know if that's Criterion's transfer or what, but yeah, they do some weird playing around with the voiceovers and the ADRs and those things. But I like that scene where the girl comes into the dance hall. There's a really great moment where it cuts back to the teacher who's playing piano, and she's kind of like quivering behind her chair. I think that's awesome. Like in just like, it's like 2 seconds, and it totally just completely makes you feel for her, like just total fear and like panic. That's wicked. And then another scene I really like is when the bigger girl who was there with them like runs away, and you get this like weird aerial drone shot, and it's like kind of like moving around, and again it really instills a sense of like panic, I guess. So that was really good too. I like that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, there's like these good things about it. Like I just think that
it just never comes together.
There's not much happening enough to like keep your attention, I guess, because I found that like I just kind of zoned out for a bit during it, and I was kind of like, oh, it's still going, and it's like, well, why is this scene here? I don't know.
Nobody knows, Jer.
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
But that brings us to who hates this movie.
A few people, I would imagine.
Yeah, I can imagine this movie might anger some people or frustrate them. Like Evanston Dad, he gave this half a star. Ugh, an endless and interminable movie about a batch of oppressed schoolgirls who go missing during a picnic at the eponymous rock formation. There seem to be plenty of viewers armed with psychobabble to defend this film's deeper meaning, its undertones of sexuality, power, repression, etc., 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 blah, blah, blah. Whatever. I'm sure Peter Weir knew what point he was trying to make, but this movie is monotonous, droning bore, and I was left with no incentive to make sense of it. On top of all of it, it's also unforgivably pretentious, proof that Weir is better off sticking to the mainstream fare that has made him famous, Dead Poet Society, Witness, Master and Commander, and leave the art film to others. Grade F.
That guy didn't even fucking mention the Truman Show. What an asshole.
What a dick. Half a star from Maddie Stanfield. I've seen Peter Weir's acclaimed classic 3 times, 2 of them in a cinema. There is a haunting beauty here. Russell Boyd's cinematography is stunning. The problem I encountered during all 3 viewings, Zamfir's instrument and musical score made my skin crawl, and not in an intended way. I despise the music in this film so much, it is impossible for me to enjoy it, no matter how hard I try.
Yeah, well, it wasn't that distracting. I think the rest of the movie itself is a lot more of a distraction than the music.
And Siegfried Storstrand, he gave this 1.5 star, and he watched it thinking it was an Australian horror film. I don't know if there was something I was supposed to get, but I didn't get it. I got a kind of giallo feeling from this, which is something I do not enjoy at all. I'm not sure if that means like giallo movies or that feeling.
I would say the feeling. Let's just stick with that, yeah.
Little to no narrative structure, overly reliant on ambience alone. Were it not for the music, I probably would have rated it even lower. So we have another hot take on the music. One person couldn't stand it. The other person is only rating it 1.5 because of the music. Movies like this do nothing for me. Nothing at all. This is the polar opposite of what I look for in a movie. It makes me a little pissed as well because I was really looking forward to this.
Thanks, man. Like, that's such a fucking like weird thing to say. Like, I know I've said that where it's like, yeah, it's not for me, but it's like, this had nothing I was looking for. It's like, what are you looking for then, man? Like, I only watched this because I had to. So it's like, what are you looking for that like brought you to this movie and it didn't have it? I don't know. Weird. Time will tell.
Time will tell. Well, I think that's that.
I think so, Mattress Man.
Well, folks, after the break, you're going to find us at the bottom of the greenhouse because we've killed ourselves.